The room did not erupt when Princess Beatrice spoke. It became completely still. One sentence had crossed a line no royal expected her to approach, let alone step over. Looking directly toward Camilla, Beatrice declared, "She will never carry what the Queen carried." Charles did not interrupt. William's expression hardened, and as Camilla lowered her eyes, everyone understood that this was not merely an insult. It was a verdict on legacy, sacrifice, and belonging. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Beatrice held her ground as silence deepened around the Windsor table. The gathering had been called to decide who would oversee the late monarch's memorial ceremonies, charitable patronages, and private customs. Stewardship meant responsibility for protecting those traditions, not ownership of the woman behind them. That difference mattered, because every decision now shaped how Queen Elizabeth II would be remembered. Camilla froze with one hand above her teacup. She lowered it slowly, then looked toward Charles, expecting him to defend her. The king said nothing. His silence stretched long enough to feel like an answer, and the queen consort's face tightened as she understood that Beatrice had not attacked her crown, marriage, or place beside him. She had challenged the belief that rank could create the trust Elizabeth had earned across 70 years of service. Beatrice felt grief harden into resolve. She believed her grandmother's memory was being reshaped until Camilla appeared to stand inside a story built by someone else. The princess did not say the older woman could not wear royal jewels or perform official duties. She chose the word carry because carrying meant bearing sacrifice, loyalty, restraint, and public expectation through decades of uncertainty. A title could be granted in a moment. That weight could not. Camilla finally asked, "Was that necessary?" Beatrice did not answer at once. Instead, she opened her handbag and removed a folded card, placing it beside her untouched glass. The gesture changed the mood immediately. Her statement had not escaped in anger. She had written it, carried it into Windsor Castle, and waited for the exact moment to speak. William watched the card before turning to the aides. The prince asked them to leave, and the door closed with finality. Then he faced his cousin and lowered his voice. "You should explain why you chose today." Beatrice glanced toward Camilla, whose fear now outweighed her anger. Her words had shocked the room, but the deeper wound lay in why each person heard them differently, and why Camilla knew the statement was aimed at something far more personal than a title. To the public, the confrontation appeared to be between two women. Inside the family, it exposed 4 private battles at once. Beatrice was defending a grandmother she still mourned. Camilla was fighting to escape a lifetime of comparison. Charles was being forced to choose between his wife and his mother's legacy. William stood between generations, knowing that whatever he said next could either calm the monarchy or divide it beyond repair. Beatrice felt the past pressing against every word she had spoken. Queen Elizabeth II had never been only the sovereign to her. She had been the grandmother who remained steady when public scandals threatened to consume the family. The woman who separated private love from public disappointment. When Beatrice felt judged by the world, the Queen had never allowed embarrassment to become rejection. That loyalty shaped the princess's anger now, because she believed the same woman who had protected others was no longer present to protect the meaning of her own life. Camilla carried a different wound. She had spent years fulfilling royal duties while knowing each speech, ceremony, and gesture would be measured against Elizabeth and Diana. The queen consort, the title given to the monarch's wife, offered status, but no escape from comparison. She could succeed in 100 engagements and still be judged by the memory of 2 women whose places in public feeling could never be reproduced. Beatrice's statement struck directly at that fear. Charles heard more than grief in his niece's words. The king heard an accusation against his judgment. Elevating his wife's role had become one of the most personal choices of his reign, and any challenge to Camilla now felt like a challenge to him. He shifted in his chair, but before he could respond, she looked directly at Beatrice. "What exactly do you believe I have taken?" Camilla's voice remained controlled, yet fear had entered it. Beatrice could have named jewels, residences, patronages, or ceremonial duties. She named none of them. A place in the story that was never yours to rewrite. Charles visibly stiffened. William understood Beatrice's pain, but he also knew that humiliating the king's wife could weaken the crown when unity mattered most. He waited until the meeting paused, then followed his cousin away from the table. Beatrice stood beside a window, twisting her grandmother's bracelet around her wrist. William asked whether she regretted speaking. She looked down at the bracelet and answered, "I regret that silence made it necessary." Then she revealed the deeper truth. During a private conversation years earlier, Elizabeth had asked her to protect the meaning behind the symbols. Beatrice had never repeated that promise publicly. Until now. That private promise did not begin with the Windsor confrontation. Its true origin lay in an earlier ceremony, when one overlooked decision convinced Beatrice that her grandmother's legacy was already being quietly reassigned. Months before Beatrice's statement, a single ceremony changed everything. It appeared dignified, respectful, and carefully planned. Yet one alteration, a name removed, a chair repositioned, a tribute reassigned, left Beatrice convinced that something sacred had been crossed. Nobody shouted that day. No accusation was made. But as she watched Camilla step into a role associated with her grandmother's memory, Beatrice decided that the next alteration would not pass in silence. Beatrice had entered St. George's Chapel expecting grief, not conflict. The chapel is the royal church within Windsor Castle, where generations of the family have worshipped, married, and been laid to rest. That anniversary service had been arranged to honor Queen Elizabeth II's life and long reign, but for the princess, it carried a far more personal weight. She believed the gathering should preserve the late queen's character, not simply repeat her name beneath a new arrangement of titles. Anne had been expected to deliver the family's private remembrance. The choice made sense, because the Princess Royal had reflected her mother's belief in duty without spectacle for decades. Yet only minutes before the service began, Beatrice learned that the reading had been reassigned to Camilla. Worse, the wording had been changed. It now described the Queen Consort as the woman safeguarding Elizabeth's domestic legacy, language that appeared to transfer more than responsibility. It seemed to transfer emotional ownership. Beatrice turned toward her aunt in disbelief. Anne did not protest. She folded the original program with careful precision, placed it inside her handbag, and said, "This is neither the time nor the place." Her calmness only deepened the younger woman's suspicion. Anne was not accepting the change. She was containing her reaction until the family could no longer be embarrassed in public. Camilla walked toward the lectern, while Beatrice gripped the edge of the pew until her knuckles whitened. A lectern is the stand from which readings are delivered during a service, but in that moment it felt like something more, a place of inherited authority. When Elizabeth's name was spoken, the princess did not look toward Camilla. She looked at Anne. Her aunt answered with one warning glance, "Not here." The ceremony ended, but the unease did not. Beatrice later overheard a senior aide tell Camilla that the revised wording would help the public see continuity between queens. The phrase struck her like a confession. That evening, she opened a handwritten card Elizabeth had once given her. The message warned that continuity must never be confused with imitation, and that service lost meaning when symbols were used to manufacture affection. From that day forward, Beatrice documented every altered ceremony, transferred patronage, and rewritten family tribute. She was no longer gathering memories, she was building a case. Beatrice obeyed Anne inside the chapel, but at Windsor, with the accumulated changes laid before her, restraint finally gave way to the confrontation the family had spent months trying to avoid. When the doors closed, the monarchy disappeared, and two wounded women remained. No aides, no prepared remarks, no careful palace language. Camilla wanted Beatrice to withdraw the statement before it escaped the family. Beatrice wanted an acknowledgement that rank could not recreate devotion. Between them stood the memory of Queen Elizabeth, invoked by both, but possessed by neither. Then Camilla asked whether Beatrice had ever understood what it meant to be accepted only after decades of rejection. Camilla asked her to remain in a small Windsor sitting room after Charles, William, and the staff had left. The room felt narrower without witnesses. She did not begin with anger. She began with control. The Queen Consort, the title used for the monarch's wife, demanded a clear retraction before the words reached the public and became something larger than either woman could contain. She warned that the statement could be seen as a direct challenge to her position and an attempt to split the royal household from within. Beatrice did not retreat. Camilla had spent years waiting for acceptance, yet the princess had spent months watching remembrance become rearrangement. The older woman admitted that she had never expected to become Elizabeth and had never asked to inherit her exact place. But she refused to spend the rest of her life apologizing for standing beside Charles, serving the crown, and carrying duties the palace itself had given her. Beatrice answered with painful calm. The issue was not where Camilla stood, it was what the palace had begun placing around her. Ceremonies had been rewritten, tributes had been reassigned. Language once connected to Elizabeth's life had slowly been used to strengthen another woman's image. To Beatrice, that was not continuity, it was replacement, disguised as respect. Camilla pushed back her chair. The sound broke the fragile control between them. "Do you believe your grandmother wanted me humiliated?" Beatrice remained seated, the folded card resting on her lap. "No, I believe she wanted you to know the difference." Camilla's anger shifted into uncertainty. Beatrice then disclosed that Elizabeth had left private guidance about which family traditions should remain connected to her direct descendants, and which responsibilities could pass to the reigning household. The reigning household meant the working royal family, serving under the current monarch. This was no longer a granddaughter defending memories. It suggested a boundary, written by the late queen herself. Camilla moved to the door and called for an equerry, a royal officer who assists senior family members. She ordered him to bring Charles immediately. The king entered to find his wife standing beside the fireplace and Beatrice holding the card. Camilla said, "She believes your mother left instructions against me." Beatrice met his stare. Not against her, against replacement. The confrontation had now moved beyond hurt feelings. The question was no longer whether Beatrice had spoken too harshly, but whether the late queen had deliberately placed limits on how her legacy could be inherited. Power inside a monarchy rarely announces itself with a raised voice. It appears in sealed folders, private understandings, and sentences written for a future nobody wishes to imagine. When Charles finally reads the guidance Beatrice has referenced, the room changes again. The document does not attack Camilla. It does something more devastating. It separates the authority of the reigning queen from the personal legacy of Queen Elizabeth, and makes clear that one can be inherited while the other must remain untouched. Charles sat at the end of the table as the sealed folder was placed before him. The private family guidance was not a law or public decree. It was a set of personal instructions covering memorial traditions, charitable associations, keepsakes, and ceremonial language linked specifically to Elizabeth's life. That distinction mattered because the crown could pass through succession, but private memory belonged to the family members she had trusted to preserve it. Anne stood near the door, while two senior family trustees waited in silence. The trustees were people appointed to protect the late monarch's personal wishes and oversee how certain traditions were handled. Charles still held constitutional authority as king, yet his mother had placed responsibility for her intimate legacy in more than one pair of hands. He could overrule the arrangement, but doing so would mean openly rejecting the boundary she had chosen. Charles read the same paragraph twice. Then he slowly removed his glasses. He did not defend Camilla. He did not challenge Beatrice. The king simply stared at the page while his wife watched him search for an interpretation that would spare everyone. Anne finally broke her silence. She admitted that she had delayed presenting the instruction because she feared it would be treated as a rejection of Camilla rather than protection of Elizabeth's identity. The Princess Royal had carried that burden quietly, hoping the family could honor both women without forcing a confrontation. Instead, her restraint had allowed the disputed changes to continue. Charles reached the critical sentence. Elizabeth had written that affection built through a lifetime of service could not be transferred by title, ceremony, marriage, or proclamation. A proclamation is a formal royal announcement, but even the strongest declaration could not command the public to feel what decades of loyalty had created. Beatrice then pointed to a handwritten note attached behind the formal pages. The words, "Carry what I carried," appeared in Elizabeth's own hand. Her statement at Windsor had not been invented in anger. It had been shaped from her grandmother's warning. Charles placed the note flat on the table and rested his palm over it. Camilla waited. Anne refused to intervene. Finally, he said, "My mother has left me a crown and a boundary." The admission landed harder than any accusation. Charles now had to preserve the recent changes supporting his wife, or reverse them to honor his mother. The guidance settled the meaning of Beatrice's words, but it did not settle the family. Charles's decision would determine who felt protected, who felt betrayed, and whether Camilla remained in the room when that decision was announced. The decision arrives without ceremony, no public proclamation, no dramatic vote. Charles simply takes a pen and reverses 3 changes made in the months after his mother's death. Yet every stroke carries a personal cost. Anne's memorial reading is restored. Elizabeth's private charitable tribute returns to her granddaughters. Camilla's name is removed from the language describing the late queen's domestic legacy. When the final page is turned, she realizes the palace has drawn a boundary around her. Charles kept his voice steady as he delivered the ruling. Personal tributes connected only to Queen Elizabeth II would now be led by her children and grandchildren, not absorbed into Camilla's official role. The distinction mattered because these were not ordinary royal duties. They carried private memories, family promises, and symbols shaped by the late monarch's lifetime. Handing them to someone else would suggest that emotional history could move as easily as a title. Camilla lost none of her rank. She remained queen, continued her public duties, kept her ceremonial position, and stood beside the king as his wife. Ceremonial position meant the formal place a royal holds during state events and official occasions. Yet the ruling still felt like a public line drawn through her identity. Charles had protected her status while limiting the story the palace could tell about her. Camilla left the meeting without speaking. She entered her private room, removed a pearl brooch associated with Elizabeth, and placed it inside its case without calling for assistance. The queen closed the lid and left her hand resting there as though the smallest movement might release everything she was holding back. Charles followed her. He tried to explain that respecting his mother's boundary did not reduce his wife's value. Camilla did not look at him. "You protected her memory," she said. Then silence filled the room before she added, "Now tell me who protects mine." Beatrice felt no triumph. William found her alone and told her the 3 changes had been reversed. The prince expected relief, but his cousin began to cry. She admitted that she had never wanted Elizabeth's memory turned into a weapon against another woman. She had wanted a boundary, not humiliation. William had barely answered when a staff member entered with worse news. The exact quotation had reached a national broadcaster through a documented palace communication, including the detail that Charles remained silent after Beatrice spoke. The leak transformed a family dispute into a public crisis. Phones began vibrating across Windsor within minutes. Charles stared toward the door. Camilla closed her eyes. Beatrice understood that the family had lost control of the story. Camilla's question could not be answered by a document or a royal order. It required a private reckoning between the 2 people whose decisions would shape what happened next. The turning point does not come from Charles, William, or a palace advisor. It begins when Beatrice walks into Camilla's room alone. There are no secretaries between them, no family trustees, and no language prepared for public release. One woman has wounded the other in the name of loyalty. The other has spent years believing acceptance was always one ceremony away. This time, Beatrice does not ask Camilla to surrender anything. She asks her to stop trying to inherit love. Beatrice requested the meeting before either woman addressed the wider family. The leak had already escaped Windsor, and every hour of silence allowed strangers to define what had happened. Yet she refused to send a message through aides. Camilla dismissed her dresser, the personal attendant who helps a senior royal prepare and manage private clothing, then closed the door herself. No institution stood between them now. Beatrice spoke first. She did not withdraw the meaning of her statement, but she apologized for the humiliation it caused. By confronting Camilla before the family, she admitted, she had turned Elizabeth's memory into a blade. The princess had wanted to defend her grandmother's legacy, yet she now understood that loyalty could become cruelty when grief was given no restraint. Camilla listened without interrupting. Then the queen confessed what she had hidden even from Charles. Her efforts to preserve Elizabeth's customs had not come from a desire to erase her. They came from fear. She believed the monarchy would never fully accept her unless she proved she could fill the space left behind. Every reassigned tribute, an inherited tradition, had felt like another step toward belonging. Instead, each one had drawn her deeper into an impossible comparison. Beatrice offered a different path. Camilla could build traditions shaped by her own service, her own causes, and her own relationship with the public. She did not need to stand at the center of Elizabeth's private memorials to prove her value beside the king. Respect earned honestly would carry more weight than affection borrowed from someone else's history. Camilla made the first voluntary concession. She agreed to withdraw from the disputed anniversary reading and ask Anne to deliver it. The choice was not surrender. It was recognition that family memory belonged first to those who had lived inside it. Before Beatrice left, Camilla opened the brooch case and looked at the pearls. She did not put them back on. "Perhaps I have been carrying the wrong things," she said. "Then carry what is yours," Beatrice replied. They agreed to face the public without anonymous briefings or hidden accusations. Their unity would not erase the wound, but it would stop others from deepening it. Their private understanding offered a path forward, but the world outside Windsor had already transformed one painful sentence into a national judgment on queenship, memory, and legitimacy. By sunrise, Beatrice's words belong to everyone. They are repeated on breakfast television, printed across front pages, and debated outside palace gates. Some hear cruelty. Others hear a defense of the only monarch they had known for most of their lives. Camilla becomes the subject of a comparison she can never win, while Beatrice becomes both protector and provocateur. Yet one public image begins to change the story. The two women arriving together when almost everyone expects separation. Broadcasters frame the crisis as a battle over whether a royal title can inherit the emotional authority created by decades of service. Emotional authority means the trust and affection a person earns over time, rather than power granted by position. That distinction drives the debate, because Camilla holds the rank, yet Elizabeth still holds a place in public memory that no ceremony can simply transfer. The palace responds with a restrained statement, confirming that the late queen's personal commemorations will remain centered on her children and grandchildren. It avoids blame, but the meaning is unmistakable. Beatrice's principle has been accepted. Camilla's role remains secure. Yet the boundary around Elizabeth's private legacy is now public. One newspaper captures the division with brutal simplicity. Beneath a black-and-white photograph of the former monarch, the headline reads, "A crown can pass, a lifetime cannot." A smaller image of Camilla appears beside it. The contrast wounds because it reduces years of duty to a comparison she was never capable of winning. Crowds gather near Windsor's Long Walk, holding photographs of Elizabeth. The Long Walk is the famous avenue leading toward the castle, often used by the public during royal moments of celebration and grief. One elderly woman tells a broadcaster that Camilla deserves respect, but the late queen's place must never be reproduced. Her words echo the argument that began behind closed doors. Beatrice feels the pressure as she prepares for a scheduled charitable reception. Camilla steps from the car first, pauses, and turns back. She offers her hand. When photographers shout questions about the leaked statement, the princess hesitates. The queen keeps hold of her for one extra second and says quietly, "We walk in together." That gesture becomes the defining image of the crisis. Anne later speaks through a recorded public statement, declaring that honoring Elizabeth's unique service does not require diminishing anyone still serving the crown. The Princess Royal supports Beatrice's principle while protecting Camilla's dignity. Charles watches the reaction in silence. That evening, the king summons the family, not to punish Beatrice or defend his wife, but to establish a permanent rule governing memory and succession. The public had delivered its emotional judgment, but the final verdict belonged inside the family, where Charles would decide whether this conflict ended in resentment or became the boundary that finally freed everyone involved. The final meeting contains no shouting. The anger has exhausted itself. Charles sits with Camilla on one side, Beatrice and Anne on the other, while William listens from the end of the table. What began as a shocking insult has become a truth none of them can avoid. A title can be granted, a role can be defined, and a crown can move from one reign to another, but the love earned by a lifetime belongs permanently to the person who earned it. Charles speaks with the calm of a man who finally understands what must be protected. Queen Elizabeth's personal memorial traditions, family tributes, and intimate charitable associations will remain under the stewardship of her descendants. Stewardship means the responsibility to preserve something without claiming ownership of it. The decision matters because those customs were shaped by private relationships, not merely royal rank, and passing them elsewhere would blur the difference between succession and memory. Camilla listens without resistance. She will continue serving fully as queen, carrying out public duties and standing beside the king. But her work will now reflect her own priorities, commitments, and identity. The queen consort no longer needs to appear as an extension of Elizabeth's personal legacy. For the first time, the boundary does not feel like exclusion. It feels like release. Beatrice accepts her own failure. She apologizes for confronting the family in a way that caused humiliation, yet she refuses to apologize for defending the difference between inherited position and earned devotion. The princess places her folded statement on the table and tells Charles she no longer needs it. Her warning has been heard, understood, and made permanent. Camilla then turns toward her husband. She tells him she no longer wants palace language to suggest that she is carrying forward Elizabeth's private place. She will support the crown, serve the public, and honor the woman who came before her, without claiming an emotional inheritance that cannot belong to anyone else. Charles finally understands his mother's lesson. Elizabeth's guidance was never written to reject his wife. It protected Camilla from an impossible comparison while preserving the truth of both women. The king sees that his mother had not drawn a boundary around love to keep someone outside. She had drawn it so nobody would disappear inside another person's memory. Camilla approaches Beatrice as the meeting ends and returns the handwritten note. The princess asks whether she has read it. Camilla nods. She was not telling me what I could never become. She was telling me to become myself. There is nowhere else for the conflict to go. Elizabeth's legacy remains secure, Camilla's role becomes unmistakably her own, and Beatrice's shocking declaration is remembered not as the sentence that divided the monarchy, but as the truth that finally allowed it to move forward. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.